Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. It is good to be here. I've not done a presentation in this room. I've been to quite a few in this room, but it's really nice to be here because for 25 years I grew up on Thames Street, right in front of EB's North Gate. So it was always activity, and this area is very near and dear to me. My mother grew up on 4th Street. My dad grew up on Baker Avenue. My grandmother's still on Church Street. So there's a lot of family history that's still here. So this area is very near and dear to me. It always will be. But my second home is now Norwich, having moved up there in 2017. So I've been making quite an interesting living, to say the least. It's been really quite a journey. And this is a topic that has become very near and dear to me, and I've done this presentation several times for a number of organizations throughout the region. It's one that I really enjoy doing, and it was the topic of my first scholarly publication that I authored a few years ago that was featured in the Journal of the American Revolution. And so it's a topic that has really fascinated me because the Sons of Liberty is a topic that has been written about, but in my opinion, there's a need for more contemporary scholarship on the subject. Did anybody watch the History Channel's series called Sons of Liberty? It came out probably several years ago. Okay, well, you're not missing much. Don't bother watching it. It was all Hollywood. It was not historically accurate. It did not depict the events or the figures in the movement in Boston as they actually would have been in the 1760s. Samuel Adams was not in his 20s. He could not climb buildings. He was in his 40s, and he was probably not in very good health at that time. So it was not a historically accurate depiction. I always like to ask if some people have seen the series. But there's a couple of subtopics in this thread of which I'm researching further that I'll get into a little bit in a moment. The first thing I want to say too is if you do like this presentation, you might perhaps have me back to do another presentation that I've done on America's most infamous traitor, Benedict Arnold. I've done that presentation a few times too, and it really draws a lot of crowds. It draws a lot of people because people are very interested in the topic. That whole topic of treason is something that is still talked about nowadays. I've been hearing that word a lot in the news over the past, let's see what year is it? I'll say maybe past 5 or 6 years now. But in any event, I had just gotten back from London from an almost 2-week trip and got to see Benedict Arnold's headstone, which is at St. Mary's Church in Battersea. It was placed there, gosh, about at least 20 years ago, if not longer, by Bill Stanley, the late Bill Stanley of Norwich. And there's a picture of it right in there, and I saw that exact stone. It's really quite an amazing moment, to say the least, to have seen it. But in any event, back to Sons of Liberty. The title of this is quite deliberate, and you're going to learn the meaning of the title a little bit later in the presentation. And if you have questions, if you have a question on any clarifying details, please ask, or we can do a Q&A at the very end as well too. The first question is the easiest. Who were the Sons of Liberty? Were they an angry mob? Were they violent protesters? Or were they peaceful revolutionaries? Let's take a poll. Who thinks the Sons of Liberty were just an angry mob? Raise your hand. Okay, well, we got one. So how about violent protesters? Raise your hand if you think they're okay, very good. All right, oh, you're going to vote twice. All right, that's fine. Yeah. What about peaceful revolutionaries? Interesting. Well, the answer is it's all of the above. You really could describe them using each of these descriptors because the Sons of Liberty was an organization that existed all throughout the 13 colonies. They were a secret organization. Well, how can you be a secret organization if everybody knows about you? Well, it's a secret organization that was really the best kept secret throughout the colonies. So the membership was known amongst their ranks. It was never discussed publicly. And if you ever happen to read correspondence back and forth, you're not going to see individual names attached to those letters. We'll get into that a little bit later as well. But they all operated differently. Throughout the colonies, and Connecticut has its own unique story. I was really interested in how this group worked in Connecticut. But going back to the original Sons of Liberty that form in Boston, Massachusetts, they are comprised of men that all have quite interesting job descriptions attached to them. Whether they got a number of distillers, probably more per capita than they needed, and now we've got Loyal 9 cocktails that makes like a spiked lemonade called Sons of Liberty. I think they still make that. Samuel Adams, of course, is the original craft beer distillery. It's still privately owned. It's not part of a major conglomerate. So there's a neat little, there's a whole other presentation just related to alcohol that we can certainly get into. But the main point of this is that there's a lot of powerful members associated with this group, but a vast majority of them are going to be regular, everyday people, just like you and me. They are businessmen, they are skilled workers, they are individuals who have a stake in what's happening in the political climate around 1765 as they organize themselves against a very specific measure that is passed by the British Parliament. And the leaders of the Sons are people that we're very familiar with, or at least you're familiar with their names, whether it's Samuel Adams or Paul Revere or James Otis. And in this case, one of their biggest advantages that they had as an organization was what? They didn't have just numbers, but they actually had access to printing and distributing their messages. They really perfected this whole art of persuasive messaging and propaganda. And this particularly relates to Boston. Boston is really the hotbed of activity. It's where you see a vast number of the violent activity that occurs against agents of the British Crown. But it unfolded very differently in Connecticut. Totally different. And a big center of this story comes back to the city of Norwich, which is quite a revolutionary city. And I didn't grow up in Norwich. I've been involved with Norwich for the better part of a decade now. I've been a resident there since 2017. But it really is quite a revolutionary city. And part of my motivation in doing these talks and working in the field that I'm in is that we're trying to really turn Norwich into that historic tourism destination. Something akin to maybe historic Deerfield or Colonial Williamsburg. I mean, we have the history, we have the assets, we have the stories to tell. And it all, somehow, all circles back to this city. For those of you that are familiar with Norwich, the Norwich Town Historic District, as we know nowadays, is where the city is founded. It's where one particular leader of the Connecticut Sons of Liberty hails from. We'll get into him in a moment. We've got the historic Norwich Town Green right here, and my house is right there. That's where we moved in a couple of years ago. It's not a big house, it's one of the smaller ones on the Norwich Town Green. And then over here is the Bean Hill neighborhood. I like this map because it shows not just Norwich Town, but it also shows the Bean Hill Green and the Bean Hill settlement. I-395 basically runs through here. That's where the highway runs through.
Where's downtown? Where's modern downtown?
That's going to go this way. That's if you follow Washington Street.
So this is north of it.
Yeah, this is north of the downtown area. Yep. Yeah. So if you follow this way, you'd eventually reach the downtown portion.